This is Rachel. My husband's father paraded the woman into Christmas dinner like a prized guest, casually hinting she'd be the perfect fit for the role once I'm out of both the marriage and the company. I smiled, steady and unshaken. How charming. Did they forget to mention the firm is mine? And the prenup? She nearly dropped her glass. Mrs. Winters, your husband's on line 3, and don't forget the Harrington dinner tonight at 7. My assistant Timothy set down my coffee with practiced precision, but something in his voice made me look up from the quarterly projections spreading across my desk. Did Daniel say what he wanted? I kept my tone neutral, though my stomach tightened. Daniel hadn't called my office in months. He just asked if you'd be ready on time. Said his father has something important to discuss. Timothy hesitated at the door. Should I clear your afternoon schedule after 4? I nodded, turning back to the numbers that represented 8 years of my life. 7 million in annual revenue, 32 employees, 3 office locations. The consulting firm I'd built from nothing when I was 34 and desperate to prove I was more than just another MBA graduate. Back then I'd worked 18-hour days in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner, living on instant ramen and determination. The computer screen reflected my face now. Professional blazer, subtle makeup, the kind of put-together appearance that suggested success. But success felt different than I'd imagined it would. The wedding photo on my desk caught my eye. Daniel's arms around me, both of us laughing at something my mother had whispered right before the photographer clicked. That was 7 years ago. When did his eyes stop crinkling when he smiled at me? When did his good morning kisses become perfunctory pecks on the forehead? Rachel, you're doing it again. Margaret's voice pulled me back to the present. We sat at our usual corner table at Bistro Monroe, the lunch crowd buzzing around us. Doing what? That thing where you zone out and get that worried crease between your eyebrows. She stabbed at her salad with unnecessary force. When's the last time Daniel actually came home before midnight? He's busy with the investment firm. You know how Richard is about the quarterly reports. Margaret set down her fork. Rachel, I went through this with Brian. The separate credit card statements that started showing up. The way he'd guard his phone like it contained state secrets. Has Daniel suddenly developed an interest in your business finances? He's just trying to be supportive. Even I heard how weak that sounded. Supportive? Or calculating assets? Margaret leaned forward. Remember last month when Richard suggested you might need help managing the firm's expansion? That patronizing way he said it, like you were a child who'd accidentally built a successful company. I pushed lettuce around my plate. Richard had been doing that more lately. Showing up at board meetings uninvited, offering his expertise with that smile that never reached his eyes. And Daniel just sat there nodding along with whatever his father said. It's fine, Margaret. Really. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm here when you're ready to admit it's not. The walk back to my office building took 12 minutes. I knew because I'd been timing everything lately, creating schedules and routines that made me feel in control. 3 minutes for security check-in. 2 minutes in the elevator. 1 minute to walk down the hallway to my corner office. Except today my keycard wouldn't work. The security guard frowned, swiped it again. Sorry, Mrs. Winters. System's not recognizing your credentials. That's impossible. I'm the CO. 20 minutes passed. Other employees walked by, avoiding eye contact in that way people do when they're witnessing something uncomfortable. Finally, Marcus from IT arrived, practically sweating through his shirt. Mrs. Winters, I'm so sorry. There was a security audit request from the Harrington Group. They said it was for insurance purposes, updating all access points. The Harrington Group? My voice stayed steady though my hands clenched. And who authorized this? The request came through official channels. Mr. Daniel Harrington's signature was on it. My husband had locked me out of my own building. Marcus got me inside, babbling apologies and explanations about protocols and procedures. I barely heard him. In my office I pulled up the security logs. The audit request had been submitted yesterday at 3 p.m., while I was in a client meeting. Daniel knew my schedule. He'd chosen the timing deliberately. The drive to the Harrington estate usually calmed me. Through the suburban streets, past the country club where Richard held court every Saturday, into the gated community where old money whispered behind manicured hedges. But tonight, Daniel sat rigid in the passenger seat, thumbing through his phone with the intensity of a teenager avoiding conversation. Your father insisted on this dinner, I said, testing. Any particular reason? He just wants to celebrate the holidays. Daniel didn't look up. We usually do Christmas Eve privately. Remember? That tradition we started our first year married. His thumb stopped scrolling. Things change, Rachel. The BMW in the driveway was new. Midnight blue, dealer plates still on, parked at an angle that suggested the driver was either very confident or very eager to leave quickly. Daniel muttered something about a business associate his father had invited. On Christmas dinner? What kind of business associate comes to family Christmas dinner? He was already out of the car, walking toward the house without waiting for me. I sat for a moment, hand on my purse where the prenatal vitamins I'd been taking for 2 weeks pressed against the leather lining. I'd planned to announce it tonight. A Christmas surprise. The family expansion we talked about 3 years ago, before Daniel started working longer hours, before Richard began showing up at every family event with suggestions and criticisms, before my marriage became a series of polite interactions between strangers who shared a house. The Tudor mansion blazed with golden light, every window glowing like a theater stage. Snow began falling as I walked to the door, each flake catching the light before disappearing into the dark. Inside I could hear Richard's booming laugh, the clink of expensive crystal, and a woman's voice I didn't recognize. My hand touched my stomach briefly, a protective gesture I hadn't realized I'd started doing. Daniel held the door open, not meeting my eyes. They're waiting in the dining room. Walking through that doorway, I thought I was walking into just another uncomfortable family dinner. Another evening of Richard's condescension and Daniel's silent compliance. I adjusted my wedding ring, took a breath, and stepped into what I didn't yet know would be the ambush that would change everything. The dining room stretched before me, candlelight dancing off crystal and silver, and at the table sat a woman I'd never seen before, wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's rent and smiling at me like she knew a secret I was about to discover. Richard stood at the head of the table, his salt and pepper beard freshly trimmed for the occasion, wearing the Rolex I'd given him last Christmas. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent $12,000 on that watch, thinking it might finally earn me a genuine smile from my father-in-law. Now he wore it while gesturing toward the auburn-haired woman like she was a prize thoroughbred at auction. Everyone, I'd like you to properly meet Veronica Blackwood. His voice carried that particular tone of satisfaction I'd heard him use when closing hostile takeovers. Yale undergraduate, Stanford Law, impeccable family connections. Veronica sat in my usual seat, the one directly across from Daniel where I could catch his eye during Richard's lengthy monologues. She wore a black dress that hugged her figure perfectly, the kind of outfit that whispered money without shouting it. Her hair fell in waves that probably required a $200 blowout, and her smile revealed teeth so white they could have been porcelain. She'll be absolutely perfect for managing the firm once Rachel's transition is complete. Richard paused, savoring each word. Both professional and personal transitions, of course. The room crystallized. Every detail sharpened into painful focus. The way Lydia's hand froze midway to her wine glass, how Daniel's jaw tightened, the slight widening of Veronica's eyes as if she hadn't expected Richard to be quite so direct. The candles flickered, casting shadows that danced across the wallpaper's damask pattern. Then came the laughter. Daniel's nervous chuckle that started in his throat and died before reaching his eyes. Lydia's wine-soaked giggle, the kind she produced after her fourth glass when everything became hilarious and nothing mattered. Even Veronica joined in with a practiced laugh, though her fingers gripped her napkin. Richard's boom filled the space, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. They were all watching me, waiting for tears, for rage, for the spectacular collapse of the woman they'd decided was expendable. I reached for my water glass with deliberate slowness, feeling the weight of the crystal in my hand. The ice clinked softly as I raised it to my lips, took a measured sip and set it back down with precision. How fascinating, I said, letting each syllable hang in the air. Veronica, that's quite an ambitious proposition. My gaze traveled the table, cataloging details my brain had been too polite to acknowledge before. The coral lipstick mark on Daniel's collar, not my shade. I wore nude tones to the office. Veronica's handbag, a limited edition Hermes that Daniel had claimed was a client gift last month when I'd seen the credit card charge. The way her perfume, something expensive and French, mingled with the scent I'd noticed on Daniel's clothes for weeks. Did Richard happen to mention that the firm is actually mine? Veronica's perfectly manicured hand trembled. The wine glass slipped, Bordeaux blooming across the ivory tablecloth like blood on snow. The stains spread toward the centerpiece, soaking into the fabric Richard's mother had brought from Italy 50 years ago. Established in 2016, I continued, my voice carrying the same measured tone I used in boardrooms. 2 years before I even met Daniel. Every formation document, every article of incorporation, filed under Rachel Marie Winters. Richard's knuckles whitened around his fork. Tao, see here. I'm not finished. I turned to Daniel, whose face had drained of color. Darling, did you forget to mention our prenuptial agreement to your father? The one you signed so eagerly? Page 17. Section 4 explicitly excludes you from any ownership claim to my premarital assets. Daniel's mouth opened but no sound emerged. He looked like a fish pulled from water, gasping for something that would never come. That includes the firm that currently generates the income funding this house, that Bentley in the garage, and I believe last month's Mediterranean cruise? My phone appeared in my hand. I'd been gripping it in my lap since sitting down. The screen illuminated with screenshots I'd been collecting for months, organized in folders labeled with dates and times. My thumbs swiped through them with practiced ease. Since we're sharing everything tonight, let's discuss those Tuesday and Thursday client dinners. I held the phone so everyone could see. The Fairmont Hotel. Always Suite 2012. Champagne and room service for 2, charged to our joint American Express. Daniel lunged for the phone but I pulled it back, continuing to scroll. Oh, and these charges from La Perla? $3,000 in lingerie? I haven't received any gifts, so I'm curious who did. Lydia's wine glass joined Veronica's casualty, though hers shattered against her plate, sending fragments across the table. Red wine mixed with the earlier stain, creating an abstract painting of destruction. Every contract with a Harrington Group letterhead, I said, standing slowly, smoothing my dress with one hand, contains a termination clause. 30 days notice, which my lawyers filed this morning at 9 a.m. Richard's fist slammed the table. The remaining glasses jumped and Veronica flinched. This is preposterous. We have agreements. Advisory agreements. No equity stake. No voting rights. No claim to assets. I smiled, the kind of smile I'd learned from watching him destroy smaller companies. You should have read the fine print, Richard. Isn't that what you always say? But I wasn't done. The final card remained. There's one more surprise. I moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. The building housing the firm. It's not owned by the company. It belongs to my grandmother's private trust. The lease expires December 31st. I turned, catching Veronica's eye. I've already declined to renew. You'll need to find other office space for whatever venture Richard promised you. The eruption was instantaneous. Richard's roar about lawsuits and destruction. Lydia's wail about family reputation and social standing. Daniel's sputtering words like vindictive and cruel and unreasonable. Veronica rose quietly, gathering her things with the efficiency of someone recognizing a sinking ship. Smart woman, even if her judgment in men needed work. I think I should leave, she murmured. Wise decision. I pulled on my coat, fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Oh, and Daniel, your belongings are at the Four Seasons. Presidential suite. Consider it my Christmas gift. 30 days to figure out your next move. The last thing I saw before walking out was Richard's face, purple with rage, and Daniel reaching for his phone with shaking hands. Lydia sat frozen, wine dripping from the table onto her designer dress. Veronica was already at the door, her heels clicking against the marble with the urgency of escape. The cold air hit my face as I stepped outside. Snow fell heavier now, blanketing the BMW and my own car in white. My breath formed clouds in the night air as I walked to my vehicle, keys already in hand, knowing that behind me, the perfect Harrington family was discovering what happened when they mistook kindness for weakness. My hands shook as I turned the key to my downtown penthouse, the one Daniel never knew existed. The lock clicked and I stepped into the space that had been my sanctuary for 3 years. Purchased through an LLC my grandmother's estate attorney helped me establish, paid for with inheritance money I'd never mentioned to the Harringtons. The city lights sparkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, and for the first time, I let my phone screen illuminate fully. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. The notifications cascaded down like a digital waterfall of desperation. Daniel's name appeared most frequently, followed by Richard's office number, then unknown numbers that were probably lawyers already mobilizing. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I walked to my bar cart, poured 3 fingers of scotch, the good stuff I kept here, not the overpriced swill Richard insisted on serving, and sank into my leather chair facing the skyline. The silence wrapped around me, and suddenly 7 years of memories crashed through the dam I'd built. Richard at our engagement party, raising his glass and calling me Daniel's ambitious little wife, while 200 guests chuckled politely. The way he'd emphasize little every single time, reducing my Harvard MBA and business success to a cute hobby. Daniel's transformation from the man who'd defended my accomplishments to the one who'd learned to laugh along with his father's dismissive jokes. Lydia's slurred advice at every family gathering, lecturing me about marriage while popping Xanax between courses, her 3rd divorce papers still fresh. On my entry table sat a pristine white envelope from my doctor's office. The pregnancy test confirmation I'd picked up yesterday, planning to surprise Daniel tonight with news of the family we talked about starting 3 years ago. Before his father sank his claws deeper. Before Daniel learned to echo Richard's opinion that children would distract me from my little business ventures. I didn't open the envelope. Some dreams deserve to die privately. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Your message said code red. I'm bringing reinforcements. At 2 a.m. she arrived with 2 bags of Chinese takeout, a bottle of wine, and her laptop. She found me surrounded by bankers' boxes I'd been storing here for months. Financial documents spread across my dining table like evidence at a crime scene. Her eyes widened at the organization. Colored tabs, chronological filing, cross-referenced indexes. How long have you been building this? Margaret set down the food, immediately switching into her forensic accountant mode. 3 years. Since Richard started his consulting arrangement. I handed her a folder marked with last year's date. Look at this invoice. $75,000 for client development. Margaret studied the documentation, her finger tracing the numbers. The Aspen condo. The dates match the property records exactly. There's more. I showed her file after file. The Bentley classified as necessary transportation. Wine collections for client entertainment that ended up in Richard's personal cellar. Conference trips that aligned perfectly with his vacation photos on social media. Nearly $500,000 total, all siphoned through creative accounting. This is embezzlement, fraud, probably tax evasion. Margaret's voice carried professional appreciation mixed with personal anger. But financial crimes alone won't destroy them socially. The Harringtons crowd forgives money issues if you're sorry enough and rich enough. We ate lo mein straight from containers while strategizing, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of being truly understood, of having someone entirely in my corner without conditions or criticisms. Morning arrived with unexpected pounding on my door. Through the peephole I saw Lydia, mascara streaked down her cheeks, designer dress wrinkled, hands shaking with what looked like withdrawal tremors. Please, she gasped when I opened the door. Richard froze my trust fund. All my cards are declined. I need help. I let her in, watching her collapse on my sofa. The same woman who'd spent years telling me I wasn't sophisticated enough for the Harrington name now sat trembling in my secret apartment, desperate and broken. Why should I help you? I asked, though I was already pouring her water, recognizing the signs of someone in crisis. Because I know things. Lydia gulped the water. Veronica Blackwood? She's not random. She's been Daniel's mistress for 8 months. The room tilted slightly. 8 months. Spring. When Daniel started working late. When the receipts began. Richard introduced them at a conference in March. Promised her an executive position, eventual marriage into the family once you were removed. Lydia's voice cracked. Dad's been planning this since you refused to put his name on the company documents last year. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. I'll give you his private email password. The one he thinks nobody knows. In exchange for. She hesitated, shame coloring her features. $5,000. Enough to get away, check into rehab without his control. I wrote the check without hesitation and Lydia provided the password. adding something that made my stomach turn. My mother was dying of cancer for 2 years. Dad had 3 affairs during her treatment. Monica Peterson, Sarah Williams, Jennifer Martinez. I have photos, dates, hotel receipts. Mom knew but was too sick to fight. I kept quiet for the money, but after last night, I'm done being complicit. Patricia Chen, my lawyer, arrived at noon with her usual sharp energy and tablet full of notes. She reviewed my evidence with increasing excitement, occasionally making appreciative sounds that reminded me why she charged $800 an hour. This goes beyond simple fraud, she said, adjusting her glasses. With the pattern of embezzlement, the conspiracy to remove you, the involvement of multiple parties, we're looking at potential RICO violations. Organized financial crime. RICO? Like what they use against crime families. Exactly. And here's the interesting part. I know of 3 other companies where Richard served as consultant, with similar mysterious financial losses. The owners were too intimidated to pursue charges, but if you're willing to be the catalyst. Patricia left me with documents to review and a flash drive containing her preliminary findings. Alone again, I opened Richard's email account using Lydia's password. The inbox loaded, revealing years of correspondence that painted an increasingly dark picture. But it was the folder labeled R. Contingency that stopped my heart. Email threads between Richard and Daniel, discussing options for managing Rachel's instability. Attached PDFs of psychiatric hold procedures. A forged psychological evaluation dated next week, claiming I showed signs of severe paranoia and delusional thinking. The signature of a Dr. Marcus Henley, who I discovered through quick research, had lost his license 5 years ago for ethical violations but apparently still produced documents for the right price. They weren't just planning to steal my company and end my marriage. They were planning to have me involuntarily committed, to paint me as mentally unstable, to destroy not just my present but any future credibility. I stared at the screen, feeling something shift inside me from defense to offense. This wasn't just about protecting what was mine anymore. This was war. My fingers hovered over the send button for a group message to my senior management team. The email contained just 4 words. Emergency meeting. Rosewood K. 9 a.m. Away from the office, away from any potential surveillance Richard might have arranged. I hit send and closed the laptop, the screen's glow fading into the pre-dawn darkness of my apartment. The Rosewood Cafe occupied a corner spot in the arts district, far from the financial center where the Harringtons held court. I arrived first, securing the back room usually reserved for book clubs and poetry readings. One by one, my team filtered in. Marcus with his ever-present calculator watch, Jennifer carrying her leather portfolio, Timothy clutching a worn messenger bag against his chest. All 32 employees had responded to my message. I stood as the last person entered, closing the door behind them. The morning light streamed through stained glass windows, casting colored shadows across worried faces. I'm not going to sugarcoat this situation. The Harrington Group attempted a hostile takeover of our company 3 nights ago. They failed, but they're not finished. I paused, meeting each person's eyes. I need to relocate our entire operation by December 31st. That's 8 days, including Christmas. The silence stretched until Marcus cleared his throat. Mrs. Winters, there's something you should know. His hands trembled as he opened his briefcase, pulling out 2 identical ledgers. I've been keeping duplicate books for 6 months. Richard Harrington pressured me to manipulate our numbers, inflate certain expenses, hide others. I documented everything, every request, every threat about my job security, every altered figure. Jennifer stood next, her usual composure cracking slightly. I've been recording him for 2 years. Every inappropriate comment, every proposition to female staff members. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through audio files. 23 separate incidents. Sarah from reception quit because of him. So did Amy from legal. They signed NDAs, but I didn't. Then Timothy, barely above a whisper, stepped forward. I have security footage. He handed me a flash drive with shaking hands. Mr. Daniel and that woman, Veronica. They've been meeting in your office after hours for months. Going through files, photographing documents. I saved everything before they could delete it from the servers. One after another, my employees revealed their own small rebellions, their quiet acts of protection. the room filled with evidence of loyalty I hadn't known existed. By the meeting's end, all 32 had pledged to work through the transition, some offering to use vacation days, others volunteering their personal vehicles for moving equipment. "We're with you," Marcus said simply. "You gave us opportunities when no one else would. Now it's our turn." That afternoon, Margaret introduced me to Tom Sullivan at a quiet restaurant downtown. He looked nothing like I'd expected a former FBI agent to appear. More college professor than federal investigator, with reading glasses perched on his nose and coffee stains on his sleeve. 20 years in white-collar crime division, Tom said, spreading Richard's financial documents across the table. "And this is some of the sloppiest laundering I've seen. Offshore accounts in the Caymans, shell companies in Delaware, transactions routed through Luxembourg. Amateur hour." He pointed to specific transfers, his finger tracing the money's path. "Your father-in-law's been under SEC scrutiny for 6 months. 3 pension funds filed complaints about missing money, but they couldn't prove anything. This," he tapped my evidence, "connects the dots." Our coffee extended through lunch, then dinner. Tom shared stories of executives who'd believed their wealth made them untouchable, describing their faces when handcuffs clicked shut. Somewhere between his tale of a CEO crying in court and his impression of a corrupt banker's mother yelling at prosecutors, I found myself laughing. Real laughter, not the polite social version I'd perfected for Harrington gatherings. "They always make the same mistake," Tom said, signaling for dessert menus. "They forget that empires built on lies always have someone willing to tell the truth. You just have to find them." My phone buzzed with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, then noticed the text preview. "This is Veronica Blackwood. Please don't delete. I have information you need." We met the next morning at a hotel lobby neither of us had connections to. Veronica arrived carrying a banker's box, her designer confidence replaced with something rawer, more genuine. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her hands shook slightly as she set the box between us. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she began, her voice steady despite her trembling fingers. "Richard promised me senior partner at his firm. Daniel said you two hadn't been intimate in years, that divorce was inevitable. I was stupid and ambitious and wrong." She opened the box, revealing organized folders and USB drives. "Richard knew I'd been disbarred in California. Ethics violation. I reported my boss for embezzlement, but he had better lawyers. Richard used it as leverage, promised to clear my record if I played along. The evidence she'd brought was damaging beyond anything I'd imagined. Recordings of Richard discussing my planned institutionalization. Text messages from Daniel detailing not just our affair timeline, but 2 others. A paralegal named Christine and a client's daughter named Rebecca. Photos from a private investigator Richard had hired to find dirt on me, but who'd instead captured Daniel's multiple betrayals. "There's more," Veronica said, pulling out a final folder. "Richard's been doing this for 20 years. 5 other companies, 3 divorces he's orchestrated, 2 committed wives. I hired my own investigator when I realized what I'd become part of. Take it all. I just want out." The final unexpected ally arrived that evening without warning. My mother's rental car pulled into my building's garage, and Eleanor Winters emerged carrying a casserole dish and a tote bag that rattled with what sounded like electronics. "Don't look so surprised," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of vanilla and determination. "Margaret called me. Pack your things, you're not staying alone tonight." In her hotel suite she unpacked the tote bag's contents. Dozens of small camcorder tapes, each labeled with dates going back 7 years. "I never liked Richard," she said, setting up an old camcorder to play the tapes. "At your engagement party he cornered me by the coat room, said crude things about how marriage would tame you. I started recording everything after that. We spent hours reviewing footage. Richard and Daniel at Thanksgiving 3 years ago, discussing my company's value while I was in the kitchen. Christmas 2 years past, Richard bragging about his affairs during his wife's chemotherapy while Daniel laughed. Last Easter the 2 of them planning how to gradually take control, unaware my mother's purse camera captured everything. Your father would have hated them, Eleanor said, squeezing my hand as we watched Richard toast to family values while planning my destruction. But he would have been so proud of you now. The morning after my mother's revelations arrived too quickly, announced by aggressive pounding on my office door at 7:30. Through the glass, I could see Daniel flanked by 2 security guards in uniform, holding what looked like official documents. My assistant Timothy was already at his desk, frantically gesturing for me to stay back while he called building security. Daniel pushed past Timothy, waving papers in the air. Emergency conservatorship order signed by Judge Maxwell. Due to your recent erratic behavior and mental instability, I'm assuming temporary control of company operations. Patricia Chen materialized beside me. I'd called her the moment I'd seen Daniel in the lobby. She snatched the papers from his hand, scanning them with practiced efficiency. Interesting. Filed at 6 this morning. Unfortunately for you, our injunction was filed at midnight. She produced her own documents. No changes to company control without a full hearing. Date set for January 15th. Daniel's face contorted, veins bulging in his neck. This is my wife's company. I have rights. Your estranged wife's company, Patricia interrupted. Divorce papers were filed yesterday at 9 a.m. Fault grounds including adultery and financial fraud. The lobby had filled with employees arriving for work, several with phones raised recording everything. Daniel spotted the cameras and something snapped. He lunged toward me, screaming about manipulation and lies, how I'd poisoned everyone against him. The security guards he'd brought looked uncertain, especially when our building's actual security team arrived. You've destroyed everything. Daniel shouted as security pulled him back. You think you're so clever, but I'll ruin you. No one will ever work with you again. You're nothing without the Harrington name. Jennifer from sales called out. Actually, she built this company before she ever met you. Others murmured agreement, and Daniel's face went from red to purple. As security dragged him toward the exit, he kept screaming threats. Marcus held up his phone. Already trending. #corporate Karen. The internet's having a field day with his meltdown. Meanwhile, across town, Richard was walking into what he thought would be a routine board meeting at Harrington Investments. Tom Sullivan had given me the heads up. He'd spent the previous evening having drinks with 3 board members, sharing select pieces of evidence about Richard's embezzlement. Harrison Walsh, Richard's mentor for 30 years, stood as Richard entered the boardroom. We need to discuss some concerning irregularities in accounts you've managed. According to Tom's source inside the meeting, Richard tried his usual tactics: charm, deflection, then intimidation. But Harrison produced copies of the falsified invoices, the offshore account records, the trail of stolen funds. This is preposterous, Richard blustered. My daughter-in-law is having some kind of breakdown. She's fabricating evidence. The SEC doesn't think so, board member Judith Cross interrupted. They've opened a formal investigation. We're conducting an internal audit immediately. I demand you stop this nonsense. Motion to suspend Richard Harrington pending investigation, Harrison announced. All in favor? Every hand raised except Richard's. Security entered the boardroom, not aggressively but firmly. Richard's decades of careful network building crumbled in minutes. As they escorted him out, he apparently tried calling various board members' personal cells, only to discover they'd blocked his number. The call came at 11 that night. Lydia's voice, barely a whisper. He's here. Richard's here. I'm locked in the bathroom. He's drunk and threatening to break down the door if I don't recant everything. I could hear banging in the background, Richard's slurred shouting about family loyalty and consequences. I put her on speaker while dialing 911 on my second phone, then called Tom Sullivan. We need to get to Lydia's apartment now. Tom picked me up in his sedan, driving with the controlled speed of someone who'd rushed to crime scenes before. We arrived as police cars pulled up, lights flashing against the apartment building. Through Lydia's phone, still connected, we heard the door splinter, her scream, then officers shouting commands. By the time we reached her apartment, Richard was in handcuffs, still ranting about ungrateful children and stolen legacies. Lydia sat on her couch, holding ice against a bruised cheek, but her eyes blazed with determination. I'm done protecting him, she said to the officer taking her statement. He turned to me. You want to know about family secrets? He put down mother's cat during her chemo because feeding it was inconvenient. Charged the whole funeral to company expenses. He's been hiding assets in her name for years. She's been dead for 3 and he's still filing taxes for accounts under her social security number. The officer's eyebrows rose. That's tax fraud, identity theft. Add it to the list, Lydia said flatly. The next morning, Patricia called me at 6 a.m. Brace yourself. They've filed new motions claiming you're psychologically unstable following a recent miscarriage. The word hit me physically. I sank onto my couch, hand instinctively moving to my stomach. How could they know? I only found out last week. I haven't told anyone except your gynecologist's office. We traced it. The receptionist is Veronica's cousin Emma Blackwood. She accessed your medical records illegally and passed the information to Daniel. The violation felt worse than all the financial crimes combined. This was my body, my private pain weaponized against me. The pregnancy I'd discovered just days ago, already ended by stress before it could begin, turned into ammunition for their war. This is a HIPAA violation, Patricia continued. Criminal charges. Emma Blackwood is looking at federal prosecution. But Rachel, they're going to try to use this in court, claim you're emotionally unstable. Let them try. My voice came out stronger than expected. Add it to the charges. Show the world what kind of people they really are. I hung up and sat in the morning quiet, processing the cruelty of their latest attack. Outside my window, the city was waking up, people starting normal days with normal problems. For a moment I envied them. Then my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Entire team is here early. We're moving the company today with or without official approval. You're not alone. The war wasn't over, but for the first time I understood I had an army. I stood in the conference room of our old office building, watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. In 2 hours, Richard would walk through those doors for what he believed would be his moment of triumph. My phone showed 7:45 a.m. Every piece was in position. Margaret had worked her journalism contacts all week. 3 local news stations had received anonymous tips about a major corporate scandal breaking this morning. Federal investigators were already in the building, setting up recording equipment in the adjacent room. District Attorney Sharon Walsh sat across from me, reviewing her notes one final time. Remember, she said, sliding a small microphone across the table, we need him to explicitly state his intentions. The more he talks, the better. Tom Sullivan entered with 2 FBI agents and an SEC investigator. They took positions in the corner, briefcases at their feet containing arrest warrants signed 12 hours ago. My hands remained steady as I arranged the meeting agenda, a prop for the theater we were about to perform. At 9 sharp, Richard entered wearing his most expensive suit, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His cologne preceded him, the same overwhelming scent he'd worn to every family gathering where he'd belittled my achievements. Rachel, he said, settling into his chair with practiced authority. I'm glad you've finally come to your senses. This emotional breakdown of yours has gone on long enough. I pressed record on my phone, the action visible but seemingly casual. Would you like to explain your vision for the company's future? Richard's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He opened his portfolio, spreading documents across the table. Simple. Harrington Group assumes full control. You'll receive a modest payout, enough to maintain a comfortable lifestyle while you receive the help you clearly need. The help I need. The psychiatric treatment, obviously. Daniel's already made arrangements with Whitfield Institute. Very discreet, excellent reputation for handling difficult cases. From the corner, Agent Martinez shifted slightly. Richard didn't notice, too absorbed in his own perceived victory. I've brought the transfer documents, Richard continued, pulling out contracts. Sign here and this unfortunate chapter ends quietly. No public embarrassment, no messy legal battles. You step aside gracefully and we ensure you're well cared for. I picked up the contracts, pretending to study them. And if I refuse? Then we proceed with the involuntary commitment. Dr. Henley's evaluation is quite thorough. Your recent behavior, the false accusations, the paranoid delusions about conspiracy, it paints a clear picture of someone in crisis. You mean the doctor who lost his license 5 years ago? Richard's smile faltered for a heartbeat. Medical boards make mistakes. His expertise remains valuable. I pulled out my laptop, turning it toward him. On the screen played a recording from his email account. His voice discussing bribing medical staff, forging documents, hiding assets in offshore accounts. His face drained of color as his own words filled the room. That's That's illegally obtained. You can't. Actually, District Attorney Walsh stood, revealing her presence. She can. And we have warrants for everything. The door opened. Federal agents entered, their badges gleaming in the morning light. Agent Martinez stepped forward, his voice carrying official weight. Richard Harrington, you're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, money laundering, and violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Richard shot to his feet, portfolio scattering. This is entrapment. I demand my lawyer. You'll have plenty of time to call them, Agent Martinez said, producing handcuffs. The door burst open again. Daniel stumbled in, disheveled, tie askew. Stop. You can't do this. That's my father. He lunged toward Agent Martinez, fists swinging wildly. His punch connected with the agent's shoulder before two other officers restrained him. In seconds, Daniel was on the ground, hands being cuffed behind his back. Add assault of a federal officer and obstruction of justice, Agent Martinez said calmly. Through the windows I could see news vans pulling up, cameras already rolling. Margaret had timed it perfectly. The mighty Harringtons, architects of so many quiet destructions, were being let out in handcuffs for the world to witness. I stood perfectly still, saying nothing, maintaining the dignity they tried to steal from me. 6 hours later, I stood in our new offices in the financial district. The space was smaller but filled with natural light. My entire team had gathered, 32 faces looking at me with mixtures of exhaustion and anticipation. You deserve the complete truth, I began, voice carrying through the room. 4 years Richard Harrington embezzled from this company. Nearly $500,000 recovered as of this morning. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I continued, explaining the full scope, the attempted takeover, the plans for my commitment, the conspiracy that had finally collapsed. Effective immediately, Marcus is promoted to president. Jennifer becomes executive vice president. I remain CEO. But I'm delegating operational management while I focus on legal proceedings and my health. Marcus stepped forward. What about bonuses? The recovered funds. Distributed equally among all employees. You stayed loyal when it would have been easier to leave. That deserves recognition. The room erupted in applause. Someone, I think it was Timothy, started wheeling in a cart with a sheet cake. When they pulled back the covering, the frosting read, "The Real Boss," in purple letters. For the first time in months, I felt tears that weren't from pain or anger. These people had chosen me over the Harrington name, over the promise of easy money, over the path of least resistance. The doorbell of my penthouse rang at 8 that evening. Lydia stood in the hallway, carrying takeout bags and a bottle of wine, looking more clear-eyed than I'd seen her in years. I'm leaving for rehab tomorrow, she said, setting the food on my counter. 90 days, Arizona. But I needed to see you first. We sat on my couch eating pad thai from containers, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows. Lydia pulled an envelope from her purse, aged and yellow at the edges. Mom wrote this before she died. She hid it in her jewelry box. I found it last year, but I was too much of a coward to do anything about it. The letter was dated 2 years ago, written in shaky handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably discovering who Richard really is. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to protect you. He isolated me, controlled everything, but that's no excuse. Rachel, if you're still with Daniel, run. The men in this family destroy what they claim to love. You deserve better. Lydia's hand found mine. I spent years hating you because you had the strength I didn't. But watching you fight back, you saved me too. The courtroom fell silent as I walked to the witness stand 3 weeks later. January sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spotlights. The bailiff held out the Bible and I placed my hand on its worn leather cover, promising to tell the truth while cameras rolled and reporters scribbled in notebooks. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, his orange jumpsuit replacing the designer suits he'd worn like armor. His lawyer, a public defender after Richard's assets were frozen, shuffled papers nervously. Daniel's eyes met mine and for a moment, I saw the man I'd married 7 years ago, before his father's poison had transformed him into someone unrecognizable. Patricia Chin guided me through the evidence methodically. Financial records appeared on screens. Audio recordings filled the courtroom with Richard's voice discussing my planned institutionalization. Daniel's lawyer objected repeatedly, each overruled by Judge Catherine Morgan, who studied documents with sharp attention. When Daniel took the stand for cross-examination, his strategy became clear. Paint me as vengeful, unstable, driven by spite rather than justice. She's always been jealous of my family's success, he insisted, his voice cracking. This is about punishment, not truth. Then Veronica Blackwood entered, her testimony devastating in its precision. She produced recordings of Daniel promising her my position, text messages planning our removal, photographs documenting their 8-month affair. 12 employees followed, each describing Richard's harassment, Daniel's theft of proprietary information, the systematic attempt to destroy what I'd built. Judge Morgan's ruling came swift and decisive. Divorce granted with extreme prejudice. All marital assets awarded to Mrs. Winters, plus damages of $2 million for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The gavel struck wood with finality. Outside the courthouse, news vans waited like vultures. I walked past them in silence, letting my victory speak through the verdict rather than sound bites. The collapse of Harrington Investments happened with shocking speed. Tom Sullivan called me from his office, voice carrying grim satisfaction. The SEC found evidence of a 20-year Ponzi scheme. 300 retirees lost their life savings. Richard was using new investor money to pay old returns, classic pyramid structure. From my office window, I watched moving trucks arrive at the Harrington estate. The auction notice had appeared in the newspaper that morning. Everything from furniture to Richard's wine collection would be sold to compensate victims. Part of me felt satisfaction, but another part ached for Daniel's mother, who died believing her husband was a successful businessman rather than a criminal who'd stolen from people who'd trusted him with their futures. Agent Martinez called that afternoon. We've connected Richard to 3 other companies he destroyed over 2 decades. Same pattern, consultant role, embezzlement, attempting to force out the original owners. You're the first one who fought back successfully. What about the others? 2 committed suicide. One's in a psychiatric facility, never recovered from the gaslighting. His voice carried weight. You saved more people than you know by exposing him. The next morning, building security called. Daniel stood in the lobby, disheveled, eyes wild. Against every instinct, I agreed to see him in the public cafe downstairs, security station nearby. He looked hollow, skin gray, hands shaking as he gripped his coffee cup. Drop the charges, he said without preamble. Or I'll kill myself. Right here, right now. Your fault. I recognized the manipulation immediately, the same tactics Richard had taught him, emotional blackmail disguised as desperation. My phone was already in my hand, dialing 911. Daniel's threatening self-harm at Rosewood Cafe, I told the operator calmly, loud enough for surrounding patrons to hear. Several pulled out their phones, recording. Daniel's face cycled through rage, disbelief, then resignation as he realized his final card had failed. The EMTs arrived within minutes. As they led him away for psychiatric evaluation, he turned back once. You destroyed everything. No, I said quietly. You did that yourself. The evaluation revealed what I'd suspected: cocaine in his system, prescription pills not prescribed to him, a cocktail of substances explaining his increasingly erratic behavior. From the psychiatric ward, he sent one email that Patricia forwarded to me. I never loved you. Father taught me to see women as assets, investments to manage and control. You were supposed to be easy to handle, ambitious enough to build something worth taking, weak enough to let us take it. I chose wrong. The words should have hurt, but instead brought strange relief. 7 years of questioning myself, wondering what I'd done wrong, ended with his admission that I'd never had a chance. The game was rigged from the start. Media requests flooded in. Morning shows, true crime podcasts, documentary producers. I declined them all except one, a small financial podcast called Founders Defense, that focused on protecting entrepreneurs from predatory partnerships. The host, Maria Santos, had built and lost her first company to a manipulative business partner. She understood the questions that mattered. What early warning signs did you miss? How can women protect their assets? When does marriage become a hostile takeover? The 40-minute interview generated thousands of downloads and hundreds of emails from women sharing similar stories. Business partners who'd stolen ideas. Family members who'd assumed control. Spouses who'd seen success as something to capture rather than celebrate. With the recovered embezzlement funds and frozen Harrington assets allocated to my control, I established the Winters Foundation. Not a charity but a resource, providing legal consultation, forensic accounting, and security services for women facing corporate or domestic financial abuse. The launch event was small, held in our new conference room rather than a hotel ballroom. 20 women attended, each fighting their own version of my battle. Among them sat Sarah Chin, 28 years old, whose investors were pressuring her to sign over controlling interest in her biotech startup. "They keep saying I need adult supervision," she said, voice trembling with familiar frustration. "That I'm too emotional to handle the pressure." Looking at her, I saw myself 7 years ago. Brilliant, driven, and surrounded by people who saw her success as something to steal rather than celebrate. The cycle Richard had perpetuated for decades, destroying companies and lives for his own gain, would end here. "You're not too emotional," I told her, meaning every word. "You're just too valuable for them to leave alone." Sarah Chin left the foundation office with hope replacing the defeat that had brought her through my door. 6 months had passed since that night, and I'd helped 17 women protect their companies from predatory takeovers. Each victory felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd thought the Harringtons had destroyed forever. The purchase agreement for my consulting firm lay on my desk, waiting for my signature. Evergreen Investments had offered triple the valuation from just a year ago. Not because of growth but because of reputation. The company that survived the Harrington assault had become legendary in entrepreneurial circles. They'd agreed to every condition. Keeping all 32 employees, providing equity shares, maintaining our client relationships. I signed my name with the Mont Blanc pen my father had given me for my MBA graduation, remembering the woman who'd started this company in a studio apartment above a dry cleaner. She'd been desperate to prove herself worthy of respect, of love, of a place at tables where men like Richard held court. The woman signing these papers needed to prove nothing to anyone. My hand moved to my stomach, a gesture that had become habit even 6 months after the miscarriage. Dr. Martinez, my therapist, said grief had no timeline, especially for losses that remained invisible to the world. Tomorrow I would plant a cherry tree in the community garden on Maple Street. Something living to mark what had briefly lived within me. The federal courthouse stood imposing against the September sky as I took my seat in the gallery. Richard entered in shackles, his designer suits replaced by federal prison gray, his commanding presence diminished to an old man facing consequences he'd never imagined possible. The judge read the charges, 23 counts ranging from wire fraud to racketeering, her voice echoing off marble walls. 25 years federal prison, no possibility of parole for 15. The gavel struck. Daniel received 7 years plus mandatory rehabilitation. As guards led them away, Richard turned once, searching the gallery. Our eyes met, and I saw something I'd never witnessed in 7 years of family dinners: fear. Real, bone-deep terror at facing decades in a cage of his own making. Outside, September sunshine warmed my face as I descended the courthouse steps. A familiar voice called my name. Lydia stood by a bench, 6 months sober, wearing simple clothes instead of designer labels. Her face had lost the bloated quality of constant intoxication, revealing cheekbones and clear eyes. "I wanted to thank you," she said, pulling me into an unexpected hug. "Not for destroying them, they did that themselves, but for showing me that escape was possible." She looked healthier than I'd ever seen her, working now as an addiction counselor at the same facility where she'd gotten clean. "I'm writing a book," she admitted almost shyly. "About growing up with a sociopath for a father. The signs everyone missed, the damage that spread like poison through generations." We agreed to meet monthly for coffee, 2 women who'd survived the same storm from different angles. As she walked away, I realized forgiveness could grow in the strangest soil, not for the men who'd tried to destroy us, but for each other, for ourselves, for the choices we'd made when trapped. 3 weeks later, Tom Sullivan called about something unrelated to investigations or evidence. "Would you have dinner with me?" Just dinner. No case files, no recordings, no strategy sessions. The Italian restaurant he chose was tiny, 8 tables total, run by an elderly couple who greeted him by name. We sat by the window as he told me about his grandchildren learning to ride bikes, about the woodworking class he'd started taking, about his late wife who'd loved mystery novels and terrible puns. "I've been waiting," he admitted over tiramisu. You needed time to heal, to find yourself again without the war to fight. I'm terrified, I confessed, surprising myself with the honesty. I don't know how to trust anymore. Every kindness feels like a potential trap. Then we go slow, he said simply. No rush, no pressure. Just two people sharing meals and seeing where it leads. It wasn't a grand romance with passionate declarations. It was something quieter, steadier. Tuesday dinners that stretched past closing time, Saturday walks through farmers' markets, conversations about everything except the past that had brought us together. 1 year to the day after that Christmas ambush, I stood in my beach apartment arranging cookies on a platter my mother had sent from Florida. The space was smaller than any home I'd shared with Daniel, but every inch belonged to me. The pottery I'd started making in therapy, the secondhand furniture I'd chosen for comfort over impression, the photos of people who'd stood by me when standing against me would have been easier. Margaret arrived first with wine and gossip from her journalism world. Marcus and Jennifer came together, bringing their families who'd become extensions of my chosen tribe. Timothy brought his partner and homemade bread. Even Lydia arrived, 11 months sober, carrying a manuscript box and nervous energy. As we gathered around my small dining table, I pulled out a letter that had arrived that morning. Sarah Chen's handwriting spelled out her victory. She'd retained control of her biotech company, secured ethical funding, and started mentoring other young women in STEM fields. This is what we built, I said, looking around the table at faces that had weathered the storm with me. Not the revenge, not the justice, but this, the ability to protect others from what we survived. Snow began falling outside, unusual for the beach but perfect for the moment. I raised my glass of sparkling cider. Alcohol had lost its appeal during the healing process, and offered a toast. To survival. To justice. To discovering who we really are when everything else gets stripped away. The woman who'd walked into the Harrington mansion last Christmas, desperate for approval and validation, was gone. In her place stood someone who understood that worth couldn't be granted by others, only recognized from within. The company was sold, the Harringtons imprisoned, the marriage ended, but none of that was the victory. The victory was this moment. Surrounded by genuine connection, freed from the need to prove anything, finally understanding that the most powerful thing I'd ever done wasn't destroying them. It was surviving them intact. If Rachel's journey of redemption and revenge had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button now. My favorite moment was when she turned the tables at that Christmas dinner. Talk about a power move. What was your favorite part? Share it in the comments below. For more gripping tales like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update.